This is a dangerous path you are on.
Necessity demands it.
You must understand the gravity of this decision, Robert. It affects everyone. But inaction is a decision, sir.
The solicitor's letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Cecily Marsh would later consider appropriate. Tuesdays had never been kind to her. She was at her father's desk when Mr. Peel brought it in, sitting in his chair, using his pen, surrounded by his ledgers, doing the work he had done for 23 years with a thoroughness that had made him respected in 3 counties and comfortable in none of them. The desk was walnut, scarred at one corner where he had rested a hot iron years ago, and Cecily had not moved it, or the scar, or anything else. The study was as he had left it. This was either devotion or practicality, and she had not yet decided which. "From Aldermere's solicitors," Mr. Peel said, setting the letter on the blotter with the particular delicacy of a man delivering bad news he already knew the contents of. Cecily looked at him. He had the decency not to look away, though she could see it cost him. "You've had a copy," she said. "Not an accusation, a fact. His Grace's office sends duplicates to the estate steward as a matter of course." "So, of course." She picked up the letter. The seal was clean, the handwriting precise, the handwriting of men paid to be precise about things that ruined other people. "When did yours arrive?" "Friday." 4 days. She set this information aside, where she kept things that required thought before feeling. The letter was brief. The lease on Dower House, Aldermere, Derbyshire, held in the name of Mr. Thomas Marsh, solicitor, had lapsed, or rather, so the letter argued, had become subject to formal contest. The lease contained no succession clause, and as Miss Marsh was unmarried, without executor status, and not named in the instrument, the current arrangement had no clear legal standing. His Grace the Duke of Aldermere wished to convey his condolences for the family's loss, and to advise that the terms of occupation must be renegotiated at the earliest convenience. A representative would be in contact. His Grace remained, etc., etc. Cecily read it twice. "He wishes to convey his condolences," she said. "So it appears. His condolences, and my contested occupancy in the same paragraph." Mr. Peel said nothing, which was one of the things she had always liked about him. She set the letter down and looked out the window at the walled garden of the main house, visible from the Dower House study on clear days. The espaliered apple trees her father had planted against the south-facing wall in his first year at Aldermere, trained by his own hand against the stone with a patience she had found baffling at the time, and now understood completely. He had tended them by arrangement with the previous steward, who had been glad of the expertise. Nobody had tended them since her father died. "Is there a copy of the original lease in his files?" she asked. "There is. I brought it." He produced it from under his arm with the air of a man who had thought this through. "I thought you might want to read it before you replied." She almost smiled. "Sit down, Mr. Peel. This may take some time." The lease was 41 pages, which was 38 pages more than most people would read. Cecily read all of it. She read it the way her father had taught her to read legal documents, slowly, from the back, because the important things were always buried in the provisions that assumed nobody would get that far. She got to page 7 at 9:30 in the evening, with the fire burning low and Mr. Peel long since gone home. She read the clause twice. Then she sat back in her father's chair and looked at the ceiling. The clause was a co-signatory provision, standard language, the sort of thing inserted as a formality and promptly forgotten. In this case, page 7 required a second signatory from the landlord's legal representative to validate any contested renegotiation or compelled change of tenancy. The word contested was the operative word. If the renegotiation were uncontested, if she simply agreed to whatever terms they proposed, the clause meant nothing. But if she disputed the basis for renegotiation, any resolution instrument would require that second signature from the landlord's own solicitors. And that signature was missing from the original. The line sat blank on page 7, overlooked 20 years ago by someone in a hurry, or someone who hadn't read to the back. Which meant that if she contested the renegotiation, and she did contest it, on the entirely reasonable grounds that a fixed-term lease did not simply evaporate because the named tenant had died, the resolution could not be legally completed until the original defect was resolved, which required both parties' cooperation. Which meant Edmund Cavendish could not compel her out of this house without the assistance of the very solicitors who had made the mistake in the first place. She read the clause a third time to be certain. Then she allowed herself a single, precise moment of satisfaction, sharp and private, like the last piece of a puzzle clicked into place. Then she took out paper and began to write her reply. The Duke of Aldermere arrived at Aldermere Park on a Thursday afternoon in April, unannounced, in a travelling carriage that had clearly been on the road since before dawn. Cecily knew he had arrived because Mr. Peel appeared at her door within the hour, slightly breathless, with the expression of a man caught between two employers and finding the position less comfortable than he had anticipated. "His Grace is in residence," he said. "I see." Cecily was cataloguing her father's books, which needed to be done, and also gave her hands something to do. "Did he receive my letter?" "He did. That is, his solicitors have been in correspondence with me, and I understand His Grace wishes to speak with you directly." "How convenient. I have replied to his solicitors and indicated my availability. If he wishes to speak with me, he is welcome to write." Peel had the expression of a man who had not expected this particular response and was recalibrating. "He is the Duke of Aldermere, Miss Marsh." "I am aware." She set a volume of Blackstone's commentaries on the correct shelf. "He is also a party to a defective legal instrument, which rather levels the ground between us. When he writes, I will reply." He wrote the next morning. The note was brief, formal, and signed with his full title, which she suspected was intentional. She replied equally briefly, agreed to meet at the Dower House at 2 o'clock, and signed herself simply C. Marsh, which was also intentional. She had thought from the letter that he would be older, or at least look it. The Duke of Aldermere was 34, which she knew from various channels, but knowing a fact and standing in a room with its reality were different experiences. He was tall, dark-haired, and dressed with the kind of simplicity that cost a great deal. The simplicity of a man who didn't need to announce himself because rooms announced him without assistance. He looked at the study, her father's book still half-catalogued, the desk still scarred, the fire burning against the April chill, and she saw him take inventory of it in a single, efficient glance. Then he looked at her, and she had the distinct impression she was also being inventoried. She did not offer her hand. It was a small room, and he had arrived uninvited into a grief she had not finished with. "Miss Marsh," he said. There was a fractional pause. Less than a second, but she felt it in her chest like the space before a decision. The correct reply was, "Your Grace." She knew it. Peel, standing just inside the door, knew it. The room seemed briefly to hold its breath. "Mr. Cavendish," she said, "please sit down." She heard Peel's sharp, near-silent intake of breath. She did not look at him. Something crossed the Duke's face. It was too brief to name, but it was not the contempt she had prepared herself for. He looked at her for precisely 1 moment longer than was comfortable, and then he sat down. She sat. Between them on the desk was the lease. "I understand," he said, "that you have identified a procedural irregularity in the original instrument." "A defect," she said. "Page 7. The co-signatory line is blank. Your solicitors appear to have overlooked it when the original was drawn." "So they have informed me." His voice was level. "I should like to resolve this quickly and with as little inconvenience to you as possible." "That is very good of you." She folded her hands on the desk. "I should like to remain in this house in accordance with the terms my father agreed to for the remainder of the lease period, which has 11 years remaining." A pause. It was a short pause, but she had learned to read silences. "The lease was in your father's name," he said. "It was. And as I have written to your solicitors at some length, a fixed-term lease does not extinguish upon the tenant's death. It passes to the estate. I am my father's sole heir. The instrument is contestable only on the grounds of the succession clause, which is absent. Remove the contest and there is no case." She held his gaze. "Page 7 ensures that any resolution of the contest requires your solicitors' cooperation, which they cannot offer without first resolving the defect they created. I am prepared to be patient." He looked at her for a long moment. She had expected the cold cousin of anger that men of rank deployed. That particular quality of stillness meant to communicate that one was beneath feeling. What she saw instead was something measured and careful, and almost, very briefly, tired. "You have read the document thoroughly," he said. "My father taught me to read from the back." He stood. "I will consult with my solicitors," he said, "and be in touch." He left. Peel followed and at the door turned back just for a moment with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not disapproval, exactly. Something closer to alarm. "Miss Marsh," he said very quietly. "I know, Mr. Peel," she said. He went. Cecily remained in her father's chair for several minutes. She had been right about the Duke, she decided. Cold, efficient, here to administer the situation and move on. The tiredness she'd glimpsed was probably fatigue from the journey. She was wrong, though she would not know it for some weeks. Edmund had not planned to stay at Aldermere Park. He had come to resolve the matter of the Dower House, to speak with his steward about the winter drainage that had apparently gone wrong in 2 of the lower fields, and to be gone again before he had to feel too much about being here. Aldermere was where he had grown up. It was also where, at the age of 26, he had told Catherine Hale that he could not marry her, because his father had died 6 months prior, leaving debts that required an heiress, and not a country clergyman's daughter. He had set it in the rose garden, which was in the walled garden adjacent to the kitchen garden, both within the park's grounds. She had been very quiet. She had said she understood, and that she wished him well, and she had left Derbyshire the following week and married a man in Shropshire. He received the announcement 3 years later. He had been at a dinner he could not leave, and had read it in the library at midnight standing, which seemed appropriate. He had not been back to Aldermere since. He stayed because the drainage problem was worse than Peel's letters had indicated, because the north wing needed attention he had been deferring for 2 years, and because he was, in some way he did not examine, not quite ready to leave. He told himself these were practical reasons. The morning after his meeting with Miss Marsh, he found Peel in the estate office and asked without preamble whether addressing him as Mr. Cavendish had been a deliberate choice on her part. Peel set down his pen. This was how Peel demonstrated he was taking something seriously. "I believe so, Your Grace. She has done it before?" In correspondence with my predecessor, she addressed the estate as the Aldermere estate rather than His Grace's estate. I noticed it at the time. He paused. Her father used the proper form. She does not appear to have inherited the habit. Edmund looked at the wall for a moment. She is aware of what she is doing. I have never known Miss Marsh to be unaware of what she is doing. Edmund picked up the lease. Has she been in contact with any other solicitors, beyond her response to mine? Not that I am aware of. She does not have the funds for it. He paused again in the way Peel paused when he was deciding whether to add something. She found whatever she found in that lease herself, Your Grace, from her father's copy. Edmund set down the lease. He went to stand at the window that looked out over the walled garden, where the espaliered apple trees her father had planted were just coming into leaf, the branches spread against the south stone wall in the patient geometry of 20 years' training. He had walked past them when he arrived without noting them. He noted them now. "She is not performing grief," he said. Not a question. Peel said nothing, which was from Peel an answer. He encountered Miss Marsh again on the 5th day, which was 4 days sooner than he had intended. He was walking the south boundary with Peel, assessing the fencing, and she was on the other side of the wall in the lane, carrying a basket in the direction of the village, with an air of purpose that suggested she had entirely forgotten the existence of dukes. "Miss Marsh," he said, because ignoring her presence at 5 yards seemed both rude and implausible. She looked up. Her expression organized itself rapidly into something courteous. "Mr. Cavendish." It happened again. That small, deliberate substitution. He heard Peel shift slightly beside him, that particular adjustment of a man who wanted very much to be somewhere else. "I did not know you went into the village on Thursdays," he said. "Tuesdays and Thursdays." She adjusted the basket. "The Barrow family in the lane. Mrs. Barrow has been unwell since February. I bring what I can." He walked with her a few steps without quite deciding to. Peel fell back, with the discretion of a man who had learned when to become invisible. "The apple trees in the walled garden," he said. "Your father planted them." She looked at him, a quick assessment. "He did. In his first year here. The previous steward had been trying to establish them for some time without success. My father understood the wall's drainage." A pause. "Someone ought to look at the south branch on the oldest tree. It is putting too much weight on the training wire. I will have Peel send someone." "You could send me," she said. Then, as if hearing herself, "I am familiar with the work, but I understand if that is not, that is to say, it is your garden." He looked at her. She was looking ahead down the lane, not at him, with the expression of a woman who had just offered something and was uncertain whether she had been unwise to do it. "It would be no inconvenience," he said. She glanced at him. "Then I will look at it tomorrow morning." She went on toward the village. Edmund watched her go, the efficient stride, the full basket, the plain bonnet that made no concession to the possibility of being observed, and then turned back to find Peel at his shoulder, expressionless. "She goes every Tuesday and Thursday," Peel said, "rain or otherwise, and she has said nothing about this in her letters to the solicitors." "She would not," Peel said. "She sees no connection between what she does and what she is owed." Edmund walked on. He was beginning to understand, with the discomfort of a man recognizing a misjudgment, that he had constructed an entirely inaccurate account of who Cecily Marsh was. He had read solicitor's daughter, contested lease, no executor status, and assembled a woman using sentiment as a legal instrument. What he was assembling now, piece by piece, was something rather different. She came to the walled garden the next morning at 8 o'clock. Edmund was there by coincidence, or something he was willing to call coincidence, walking the perimeter of the rose garden, which occupied the north corner of the walled space. She nodded to him businesslike, and went directly to the espaliered trees without fanfare. He watched her work. She moved with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, and had no particular interest in performing it. The problematic branch she had mentioned was examined, measured by eye, re-secured with a length of cord she had apparently brought for the purpose, and resolved in under 10 minutes. "Your father taught you," he said. "He taught me everything useful." She ran her hand along the secondary branch, checking the tension. He said apple trees reward the same qualities as legal work: patience, attention to what is actually in front of you, rather than what you expect to be there. A pause. He had a gift for seeing what was actually in front of him. "Unlike most people." She looked at him. The grey eyes were direct, unhurried. "Unlike most people," he said. "I believe my solicitors have sent you another proposal." "They have." "And?" She wiped her hands on a cloth she produced from her pocket. "Their proposal requires me to sign a new instrument that relinquishes my contest of the succession question in exchange for a 2-year extension on original terms, after which the lease reverts entirely." She folded the cloth. "It resolves their problem. The defect on page 7 remains. They have simply asked me to stop caring about it. What resolution would address yours?" She looked at him directly. She had the quality of a person who had decided something and was at peace with the decision. "The full remaining term, 11 years, a properly drawn instrument that names me as tenant in my own right, resolves the succession question honestly and corrects the defect in the original." She paused. "An honest one." He held her gaze. She did not look away. Behind her, the apple trees held their new leaves against the south wall, with the quiet authority of things that have been well tended. "I will speak to my solicitors," he said. "You have said so before," she said. "Not unkindly, simply accurately. This time," he said, "I mean it differently." She read him for a moment, that grey, assessing look, and apparently found whatever she was looking for because she nodded once, gathered her cloth and cord, and walked back across the garden. She did not look back. The solicitors wrote again. She replied again. Edmund read the correspondence from both sides because Peel, who received copies of everything, left them on the desk in the estate office with a precision of placement that suggested it was not accidental. She was very good. He had known this from the first letter, but reading the full exchange confirmed it with a clarity that was almost uncomfortable. Her replies were legally exact, courteous to the point of implication, and declined every proposed solution that did not give her what she had actually asked for. She did not threaten. She did not appeal. She simply held the position with the patient, absolute quality of the espaliered branches against the south wall, bent to the shape required, but not at any essential point giving way. He had misjudged her. He sat with this conclusion the way he sat with most uncomfortable facts, quietly, privately, and without sharing it with anyone until he had decided what to do about it. What he did was invite her to the park. The invitation was formal, phrased as a request for a meeting to discuss the legal situation, which was true enough. He sent it by Peel, which was cowardly and also convenient. She accepted by the same route, which suggested she understood the channel and was prepared to be equally businesslike. She arrived at 2 o'clock precisely. He had expected her to be early, which would have suggested anxiety, or late, which would have suggested point-making. She was neither. He received her in the library. He had intended the drawing room, but he had been in the library when she arrived and hadn't rearranged, and there was something about it that felt not appropriate exactly, but honest. It was the best room in the house. He had always thought so. She stopped just inside the doorway and looked at the shelves. "My father spoke of this room," she said. "He used it occasionally. Peel mentioned he had a standing arrangement with the previous steward. He came here on winter afternoons. He said it was the best light in Derbyshire." She said it neutrally as a fact, but he heard underneath it the particular frequency of grief that has been lived with long enough to be spoken aloud without breaking. "Please sit down, Miss Marsh," he said, and was careful to say it with precision because she deserved precision. She sat. He sat across from her. On the table between them were the letters. "I want to make you an honest offer," he said. She waited. "The co-signatory defect is a genuine problem. My solicitors made it, and the simplest resolution is to void the original instrument and draft a new one." He paused. "I am not prepared to offer you 2 years. I will offer you the full remaining term, 11 years, under the original conditions with a new instrument that correctly names you as tenant in your own right and resolves the defect cleanly. No contest, no conditions." She looked at him for a moment that was slightly longer than the situation required. "Why?" she said. He had expected negotiation or suspicion or a counter-offer. He had not expected why. "Because it is what is owed," he said. "Your father managed this estate's affairs for 23 years. The defect is mine to correct, not yours to bear." She was quiet. He could see her considering it. Not whether to accept, he thought, but whether to trust the offer. "You will want that in writing," he said. "I will want it in writing," she agreed. And then very quietly, "My father said you were a man of your word." He looked at her. "You knew my father's opinion of me?" "He had a great many opinions. He kept them mostly to himself." A slight pause. "He made exceptions for people he respected." Edmund said nothing. The library was quiet around them, the good old quiet of a room that had held many conversations and could hold this one too. "I will have my solicitors draft the new instrument by the end of the week," he said. "Thank you," she said, and then she looked up at him with those steady grey eyes. "Mr. Cavendish." He did not leave Aldemere. This was not a decision he made so much as a decision he kept not making every morning, when the practical reasons for staying presented themselves and he allowed them to. The drainage, the north wing, the fencing along the south boundary. Peel, who had accumulated 2 years of deferred decisions that required a signature. He also, as the weeks passed, found himself walking the walled garden more frequently than the apple trees required. She was often there, or in the kitchen garden adjacent to it, or on Tuesdays and Thursdays walking along the lane between the dower house and the village, carrying something useful in the direction of something necessary. She had arranged a kind of quiet patronage of 2 families in the village. She brought things, mended things, organized things, and declined to call it charity, because the word implied a distance she did not feel. He knew this because Peel told him. In the careful way Peel shared information he thought Edmund should have. "She does not know I've told you," Peel said. "I would imagine not." Her father did the same. Different families, different years, the same habit. A pause. He would have been glad she stayed. Edmund did not respond to this. Peel did not require him to. The new lease was signed on a Wednesday, which Cecily mentioned afterward was a slight improvement on Tuesdays. Edmund had been uncertain whether this was a joke until she looked at him with the ghost of something at the corner of her mouth, and he understood that it was, and that it was also a test and that he had passed it by not explaining. She did not call him Your Grace when she signed it. She said, "Thank you for keeping your word, Mr. Cavendish," and she walked back to the dower house, and Edmund stood in the estate office with a signed lease and the very clear sense that something had begun. May arrived, and with it the particular cruelty of a Derbyshire spring, 3 warm days that persuaded the countryside into bloom, followed by a week of cold rain that punished the optimism. The park's kitchen garden was a disaster. The dower house's kitchen garden was not, because Cecily Marsh had covered everything on the 3rd warm day, and uncovered it when the rain cleared, a fact Edmund learned from Peel with the now familiar sense of being outpaced. They had developed, without discussing it, something that was not quite friendship and not quite professional acquaintance. They walked the estate together on Saturdays, ostensibly so he could be informed of what needed doing, and she could ensure it was noted by someone with authority to act. It was practical. It was entirely practical. Neither of them had said anything that was not practical, and yet he was now aware in every conversation of the precise distance between them. It was on one of these Saturdays that she said, "You don't enjoy being here." They were standing on the ridge above the eastern fields, looking down at the home farm. The rain had cleared 2 hours ago, and the light was doing what Derbyshire light did after rain, going silver and very wide. "I beg your pardon?" he said. "Aldemere, you don't enjoy being here." She wasn't looking at him. "You've been here 6 weeks and you have not once—" She paused. "Forgive me. It is not my observation to make." "Say it." She looked at him then. "You move through this estate as though you are cataloguing it, as though you are managing a property you have inherited, rather than a place where you grew up." The accuracy of it was mildly winding. "And how do you know I grew up here?" "Mr. Peel, and the walled garden." She turned back to the view. "You walk through it every time. You have never once gone into the rose garden." He had not realized, or rather, he had been aware of not stopping and had not asked himself why. "Something happened here," she said, "not a question. Many things happen everywhere over 34 years. "Yes." She did not push. She had a quality he'd noticed early and had come to rely on without meaning to. She asked the thing once, and then stopped, and waited to see if you'd answer when you were ready. It was either remarkable patience or remarkable confidence in the idea that truth surfaces eventually. He suspected the latter. He said, "I made a choice here that I would not make the same way now." "What kind of choice?" "The kind one makes at 26, when duty seems clearer than it turns out to be." He looked toward the walled garden from the ridge, small and enclosed from here. "I told someone they deserved better than I could offer. I believed I was being honorable." "Were you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was being certain about things that deserved uncertainty." Cecily said nothing. Below them, 2 of the farm dogs were racing each other across the wet grass with the complete abandon of creatures unburdened by regret. "She married a man in Shropshire," he said. 3 years later, I hope she is happy. I have not been able to bring myself to find out." He had not told anyone that. He had not said it aloud to any person in 8 years. He turned to look at Cecily and found her watching him with an expression that was not pity. He would have tolerated pity less than almost anything, but something closer to recognition. "My father used to say," she said, "that the most expensive mistakes are the ones we make while trying to be good." He looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. She held his gaze without difficulty. Then she said, "We should look at the eastern fence before the light goes," and walked on. And he walked with her, and neither of them mentioned what had just happened. He knew, walking back, that something had shifted permanently. He was, for the first time in a very long time, in a situation he could not administer. He could not draw up a lease for this. There were no clauses. That evening, he went to Peel. It was later than he usually called at the estate office, past 7, the light failing outside, and Peel looked up from his accounts with the expression of a man who had been waiting to be found. "Sit down," Edmund said. Peel sat. Edmund remained standing, which he recognized as a habit of his when something mattered. "Her situation," he said. "The true one, not the legal position." Peel set down his pen. "The lease is settled now, you know that." "I am not asking about the lease." A pause. Peel looked at his hands on the desk and then back up. "She has very little money. The lease costs her almost nothing. Your father never raised the rent in 20 years, and you have not raised it since. She knows this, and does not take it for granted. But her father's estate was nearly nothing. He was generous in life and careful to leave her the lease, but beyond that," he stopped. "She has enough for perhaps 2 more years. After that, it depends on what she is able to arrange." "What is she able to arrange?" "Nothing that is presently arranged." A pause. "She had a prospect before her father died, a young man from Derby. When the situation became clear, the state of the estate, the money, the lease contest, he withdrew." Peel said it flatly, as a fact, with the restraint of a man who had opinions about this that he was not going to express. Edmund was quiet. "She has an aunt in Bath who means well," Peel continued, "and a great deal of practical ability that is worth considerably more than it will ever be valued in the market available to her." He paused again. "I tell you because she will not, and because I think you should know what kind of woman you are dealing with." "I know," Edmund said, "what kind of woman I am dealing with." He said it with a certainty that made Peel pick up his pen again and make a note he did not show anyone. There was a silence. Outside, the May evening was cooling toward dusk. "Peel," Edmund said, "she calls me Mr. Cavendish." "Yes, Your Grace." "You were alarmed the first time." "I was." A careful pause. "It is not the form. She knows it is not the form. I expect she knew it would alarm me." "And what do you make of it?" Peel considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I think," he said at last, "that she decided on the day you arrived what kind of relationship she was willing to have with you, and she communicated it in the only way available to her that you could not contest." Edmund looked at him. "She could not refuse to receive you," Peel said. "She could not decline your solicitor's letters. She could not hold the estate at a distance." He paused. "She could decline to call you Your Grace, and so she did." Edmund was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you, Peel," he said, and went back to the house. He did not sleep particularly well, which was also information. The letter from London came on a Thursday. Edmund read it in the library, standing. It was from his aunt, Lady Cheswick, who had the social reach of a naval frigate and approximately the same subtlety. She had heard, she did not specify from whom, which meant from everyone, that he was at Aldermere and that he appeared to be spending a considerable quantity of time in the company of a solicitor's daughter living on the estate. The letter was 3 pages. The substance occupied the first paragraph. The remainder was the manner in which it was delivered. The substance. This was being talked about. If he had matrimonial intentions regarding Miss Marsh, he ought to declare them promptly, or her reputation would suffer considerably more than his. If he did not have such intentions, he ought to return to London immediately, and make that plain by his absence. He read it twice. Then he set it on the desk and looked at it. He had not, until that moment, named to himself what was happening. He had kept it in the unmarked category of things he was aware of, but not prepared to examine, a category that was, he now saw, full to the point of bursting. He went through the last 6 weeks with uncomfortable efficiency. The walks, the conversations, the ridge above the eastern fields, the walled garden in the mornings, the way she said, "Mr. Cavendish," and the way he had come to wait for it, the way a man might wait for a word in a language he was only beginning to understand. He put the letter in the fire. This resolved nothing. He was aware it resolved nothing. He asked her to walk with him on Saturday, as usual, but this time wrote a note to request it, which was not usual. She came to the park at 10 o'clock, reading the slight variation with the grey eyes that missed very little, but said nothing about it. He took her to the rose garden. She registered the destination when they turned down the path. He saw the fractional pause, the recognition, but she went with him, and did not make it easy by asking questions. The roses were not yet in bloom. The bushes were full and leafed out with buds still closed, the whole garden holding what it was about to be. He stood in the middle of it and felt the weight of 8 years press briefly against his ribs and then release. "I owe you an honest conversation," he said. "You have been quite honest with me," she said. "I have been honest about the lease and about Catherine Hale." He turned to face her. "I have not been honest about why I have not left." She was quiet. The garden was quiet. Somewhere beyond the wall, a blackbird was running through its repertoire with complete seriousness. "I stayed," he said, "because I could not find a good reason to go." He stopped. That was inadequate. He had not said an inadequate thing to this woman since the first week, and he was not going to start now. "I stayed because when I am in conversation with you, I am attending to it completely, which I do not do with most conversations. I stayed because you call me Mr. Cavendish, and I have been waiting every time to hear what you call me." She looked at him. "I stayed," he said, "because I have spent 8 years being certain about things that deserved uncertainty, and I find myself unwilling to make that particular mistake again." A pause. Not a silence with weight, a real pause, the kind that happens when someone is deciding whether to trust something. "You misjudged me," she said, "when you arrived." "I did. I thought you were using the lease as leverage through sentiment. And now? Now I think you are the most capable person at Aldermere, and that you have not asked for assistance from anyone, because you decided some time ago that the asking would cost you more than the situation." She looked away. Something moved briefly in her face, and the thing underneath, the thing she managed so well that most people probably didn't know it was there. "That is—" She stopped. "True," he said. A small pause. "Uncomfortably so." "Then we are even," he said. "You told me I moved through Aldermere as though I were managing an inheritance." "You were." "I was." He looked around the garden, the closed buds, the old stone wall. "I am attempting to do otherwise." She turned back to him. "What are you asking me, Mr. Cavendish?" He held her gaze. "I am asking whether you would be willing to know me better than you do, without the lease between us, and without the question of who has the advantage." A pause. "I am asking whether you would consider, whether you think it possible." He stopped. He had prepared something more coherent than this and was not delivering it, because she was looking at him with those grey eyes, and he had lost the thread. "You are asking me," she said carefully, "whether I might consent to being courted." "Yes," he said, "that is what I'm asking." The blackbird in the lane beyond the wall reached a particularly ambitious phrase and then went quiet, as though it too was waiting. "I should like to know," she said at last, "that you have considered what this means in practical terms." Her voice was steady. "I have no money to speak of, and no connections of use to you, and the world will have opinions about a duke who courts a solicitor's daughter on a previously disputed lease. The lease is no longer disputed. That is not the point I am making." "I know." He kept his gaze on hers. "I have considered it. The world will have opinions. It has always had opinions. I have spent a considerable portion of my life managing those opinions, and I find, at 34, that I am somewhat less interested in the project than I once was." A pause. "My aunt has already written." Something crossed her and I put her letter in the fire. She looked at him for a long moment. He was aware, standing in a rose garden with no document between himself and the outcome, that this was entirely out of his hands. "I called you Mr. Cavendish," she said slowly, "because your grace felt like a distance I was not prepared to accept." She paused. "I do not know precisely when I decided that." "I think I know when I first noticed it," he said. "When?" "The study. The first day. You stopped just before you said it, and then you chose something else." He watched her. "It felt like a decision about what kind of ground we would stand on." "It was," she said. "I think I was establishing—" She stopped, and for the first time in all their weeks he saw her uncertain. It lasted less than 2 seconds. "I think I was establishing that I was not afraid of you." "Were you?" "A little," she said, "at first." "And now?" The ghost of a smile. The real one, not the careful, courteous one deployed in company, but the one that reached her eyes and didn't ask permission. "Not in the least," she said. Something unknotted in his chest. "May I call on you tomorrow?" he said. "You may," she said. He walked her back through the gate and down the path toward the dower house. At the turn she stopped and looked at him. "Edmund," she said. Just that, his name in her voice for the first time, quiet and deliberate and given like something she had been holding. "Yes?" he said. "Nothing." A pause. "I simply wanted to know what it sounded like." She walked back to the dower house. Edmund stood on the path until she went inside. For the first time in 8 years, the rose garden felt like a place where something might grow. He called the next day and the day after, and by the end of the following week, Peel had stopped making any pretense of not noticing. The village had opinions, predictably. Edmund found he had been entirely truthful about the opinions of others. He was substantially less interested in them than he would once have been. He brought her books from the library, because he had learned she read with the same thoroughness she applied to legal documents, to the back, with annotations in a handwriting smaller and more precise than her father's. She returned each one with new notes alongside the old ones, and occasionally alongside his own, from the years when he'd read in this house and underlined things he thought important. Once he found a note beside an underlined passage, his underlining 15 years old, that said simply, "Do you still agree with this?" He wrote back in the margin, "Less than I did." She returned the book a week later with progress. They argued about Cowper versus Crabbe in the walled garden, while she did something efficient with the apple tree training, and he held things when she asked him to without being asked twice. They argued about the eastern field drainage, in a way that turned out, when the work was eventually done, to have been her correct and him mistaken, and he told her so, and she received it without triumph, which he found more gratifying than the victory would have been. He told her about his father, the debts, the estate, the weight of 23 and newly responsible for everything. She listened completely, without interrupting, without rushing toward consolation. She told him about the year after her father died, not the legal situation, the other part, the weeks of eating badly and sleeping in the chair in his study and talking to his books because she could not bring herself to pack them, the particular loneliness of grief that has no audience. She told him this quietly, in the walled garden in the late afternoon light, as though it was simply a fact of her life she was sharing, because he had asked and she had decided he could hold it. He could hold it. He was aware of this with more certainty than he'd felt about most things. One morning in late May, he found her in the library. She had not been invited precisely, or rather he had said at some point that the library was available to her whenever she wished, which he had not intended as a formal invitation, and which she had apparently taken as one. She was at the far window, standing, reading something with the quality of attention she brought to everything, total and uncuriable. She did not hear him come in. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The morning light was doing what it did in this room, long and clear through the south window, the particular light her father had apparently walked to the park to sit in on winter afternoons. She was standing in it without being aware of it, reading with her whole body slightly angled toward the page. He must have made some sound because she looked up. "I should have announced myself," she said. "Not an apology, an acknowledgement." "You should not," he said. "What are you reading?" She turned the spine toward him. Blackstone's Commentaries, Volume 2, his copy, considerably annotated by 4 generations of the family. "I found a passage I wanted to compare with something in my father's copy. Your grandfather disagreed with Blackstone on the matter of defective instruments." She turned the book back and read, "A defect known to one party and concealed from the other cannot constitute a valid foundation for contest. Your grandfather has underlined it twice and written 'good man' in the margin." Edmund crossed to her and looked at the page. She was close enough that he was aware of her proximity, with the particular awareness that had become familiar over the preceding weeks. Something he had given up pretending was not there. "He would have liked you," he said. "My grandfather. He preferred people who read the instrument, rather than taking someone's word for it, rather than assuming it said what they'd been told it said." She looked up at him. They were standing at the south window, the long clear light between them and the world outside. "Edmund," she said. "Yes." "I have been thinking," she closed Blackstone, "about what you asked in the rose garden." She set the book down. "I want to tell you something that I have not told anyone." He waited. When Mr. Fielding withdrew, the man from Derby, she paused, not with distress but with the care she gave to things she was saying precisely. "I was not heartbroken. I was humiliated because the manner of it was unkind, and I was frightened about the future, but I was not at bottom heartbroken." She looked at him steadily. "I have thought about why for some months, and I believe it is because I had never told him anything true." He was very still. "I told him what was appropriate to tell a man one was engaged to," she said. "What I thought, what I read, what I believed, the surface of things." She paused. "I have told you things I did not intend to tell anyone." "The year after your father died," he said. "Yes, and other things." She picked up the Blackstone and held it without opening it, a thing to do with her hands. "I do not know when that happened. I only know that it has, and that it seems relevant to your question." He reached out and took the book from her, set it on the shelf. Then he took her hand, which was not dramatic and was not meant to be. It was simply the most honest thing he could find to do. "Then I am asking you again," he said, more plainly than before. She looked at their hands. "I love you," he said. "I would like to marry you. I am not certain of the timing or whether I have conducted myself well enough to deserve the answer I am hoping for. I am certain that Aldermere is a better place with you in it, that I am more honest with you than I am with anyone, and that if you will have me, I intend to spend a very long time giving you cause to call me something other than Mr. Cavendish." A pause, a real one. "Is that a proposal?" she said. "It is an unambiguous one." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window, the walled garden held the morning in its old stone walls, the apple branches spread and patient and full of what they were about to be. "Then I will tell you something unambiguous in return," she said. "I have been in love with you since the ridge above the eastern fields. When you told me about Catherine Hale," she held his gaze, "because you didn't tell me to make me sorry for you. You told me because you thought I could understand it. That is," she paused, "that is the only reason I ever tell anyone anything." He raised her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "Is that a yes?" "That is an unambiguous yes," she said, and quietly, with precision, "Edmund." He smiled at her, and she smiled back, the real one without permission, and they stood at the south window in the best light in Derbyshire for rather longer than was strictly necessary. He wrote to Lady Cheswick. He did not write with the tone of a man explaining himself. He wrote with the tone of a man informing a relation of a decision that was already made. Lady Cheswick replied at length, 2.5 pages of reservations, a half-page of resigned blessing, and a postscript suggesting they marry in London so that she might arrange matters to the best advantage of all parties before the autumn season was advanced. Edmund read the postscript and showed it to Cecily. They decided to marry in Derbyshire in September, in the village church where her grandfather had drained the north fields for the previous duke. The wedding was small. Peel attended, standing in a place of quiet prominence that nobody had assigned him and nobody questioned. The rector had known the Marsh family, and his remarks were brief and kind, and included a sentence about Thomas Marsh that made Cecily press her lips together and look at the middle distance for a moment. Edmund took her hand and held it until the moment passed. She wore her mother's brooch, amber and gold, small, worn at her collar. It was the only jewellery she owned that she had not sold in the difficult year, because her mother had told her it was for a day that mattered, and she had been waiting to know which day that was. When they signed the register, she wrote Cecily Cavendish in her small, precise hand, and then looked at it with a faint air of consideration, as though reviewing a legal instrument for errors and finding none. "All in order?" he said. "Perfectly," she said. 2 years later, Aldermere Park had the particular quality of a house that has remembered what it is for. There were flowers in the rooms that had not had flowers in years. Cecily had views about which rooms received which light, and was not reticent in acting on them. The library had been reorganized, which had required a week of negotiation that Edmund maintained he had won, and Cecily declined to confirm. The walled garden was in its best condition since his grandmother's time, tended by Cecily, with the systematic devotion she applied to everything she cared about, which now included a great deal of the estate, the village families in the lane, the library's annotation system, and Edmund Cavendish. Edmund had stopped walking past the rose garden. He went into it most mornings, usually before she was up, and usually found her there by 8:30. They had taken to having their morning coffee at a table that had appeared one April without discussion, because the discussion had not been necessary. The north drainage was solved. The east fencing was repaired. The dower house was occupied by a family Cecily had found who needed it, the lease properly drafted this time, with every clause correctly executed, because she had written it herself and Edmund had signed it, which was the arrangement they had arrived at with the quiet logic of two people who understand where the actual expertise lives. She did not call herself the estate's solicitor, which would have been inaccurate under the law as it stood. She called it managing the paperwork, which was her own private understatement, and which Edmund repeated with a straight face whenever anyone asked. "You wrote every word of that lease," Edmund said the evening after it was signed. "And you signed every word," she said. "A very successful partnership. I want it noted that I made no errors. You suggested removing a clause on page 4. And you explained why I was wrong. And you agreed without arguing." She looked at him over her book. "That, Edmund, is why we have an excellent lease. In the spring of their 3rd year, their son was born. They named him Thomas Edmund Cavendish. He arrived at 5 in the morning, practical and loud, which Cecily said was consistent with his character throughout, and Edmund sat in the chair beside the bed and held his son with the awareness of a feeling that did not require a name because it was larger than any name available. "You are going to teach him to read from the back," Edmund said, naturally. Cecily had her eyes closed, but she was smiling. "And you will teach him the rose garden. He will spend half his childhood in the walled garden." "He will." A pause. "Edmund." "Yes." "Thank you." She opened her eyes and looked at him, the steady grey, the real thing, the one that had assessed him in the study on the first day and found him wanting and revised its opinion slowly and with complete integrity. For, being someone my father was right about, Edmund looked down at the small indignant face of Thomas Marsh's grandson, who had arrived into Aldermere as though he owned it, which in some respects he did, and in others would take years to earn. I had good reason, he said, to try to deserve it. Thomas was a child of the walled garden from the moment he could walk in it. He went directly for the espaliered apple trees against the south wall, the same trees his grandfather had planted and trained with patient expertise, and had to be retrieved from them on a near-weekly basis. Cecily permitted this, on the grounds that her father would have been pleased about it, and Edmund was asked several times by the head gardener not to encourage it. He encouraged it. He felt her father would have encouraged it too. At 3, Thomas could identify which branches needed attention by some instinct he had apparently arrived with. At 4, he informed Peel that the northeast corner of the walled garden wall was damp, and Peel, who had been planning to mention the same thing to Edmund that afternoon, looked at the boy with an expression of profound respect. To his grandfather, Peel said to Edmund later. His mother, Edmund said. They were both correct. Eleanor arrived when Thomas was 2, named for nobody in particular, but immediately precisely herself. She had her mother's grey eyes and her father's habit of entering rooms as though taking inventory. She was a quieter child than Thomas, with the contemplative quality of a person who has decided that observation is more efficient than participation, at least until one has gathered sufficient data. She fell asleep during Peel's history stories with the peaceful confidence of someone already certain about what she thinks. She also, from a very young age, had opinions about the library. Cecily found her there one afternoon, Eleanor not quite 4, standing before the lower shelves with the expression of someone doing serious work. She had taken down 3 books and arranged them on the floor in a pattern that was not, as far as Cecily could tell, random. "What are you doing, my love?" Cecily asked. "Putting them right," Eleanor said. "Right how?" Eleanor pointed. "This one belongs with this one. They are talking to each other." Cecily crouched down and looked at the arrangement. Blackstone's Commentaries, Volume 2, a volume of her own father's legal notebooks which had been placed on the Aldermere shelves after the house became hers, and one of Edmund's grandfather's journals, the one with "Good Man" written in the margin. "How do you know they belong together?" Cecily asked. "The pages feel the same," Eleanor said with the certainty of someone for whom this was obvious. "Old and read and kept." Cecily sat down on the library floor beside her daughter and did not say anything for a moment, because there was nothing to add to that. "We will put them together," she said at last. "You are right." Edmund found them there an hour later, Cecily and Eleanor on the library floor, both reading, the 3 books open around them like the points of a compass. He stood in the doorway and did not announce himself, because the scene did not require announcement. He went to the kitchen and asked for tea to be sent to the library, and then he went back and sat down on the floor beside them, and Eleanor said without looking up, "Papa, this man agrees with Mamma's father," and Edmund said, "He was a sensible man," and that was the afternoon. One Saturday in October, Thomas 4, Eleanor 2, the walled garden holding the last roses of the year, Edmund came downstairs and found Cecily at the table in the garden. Eleanor was on her lap. A cup of coffee sat at her elbow. She was reading the previous month's legal journal with the focused pleasure of someone doing something they genuinely enjoyed. She heard him on the path and looked up. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He sat down. Thomas was audible from the direction of the kitchen garden, a burst of enthusiasm, then Peel's steady voice explaining something with the patient thoroughness of a man who had once explained the same things to Cecily's father. Edmund poured a cup of coffee and settled into the other chair. "What are you reading?" he said. "An article on defective instruments in long lease arrangements." He looked at her. "Academically interesting," she said. "I don't doubt it." He looked at Eleanor, who was examining a late rose hip with the concentration of a scientist. The morning was October gold, the particular Derbyshire gold that lasted 2 weeks and never stopped being a surprise. "What does it say?" "That there is no settled authority on whether a co-signatory defect renders a contest void from the outset, or merely procedurally imperfect." She turned a page. "The author concludes it depends on the instrument." "What do you conclude?" She looked up over the journal. "I concluded it 4 years ago. The instrument matters, and who reads it." He smiled. She turned another page. "So there is something I have been meaning to say," she said without looking up. "Say it." "When I said Mr. Cavendish was in the beginning, I have never fully explained it." "You explained it in the rose garden." "I explained part of it." She set the journal down. Eleanor shifted on her lap, resettling against her arm. "The other part." She paused. "My father told me, years before you arrived, that the Duke of Aldermere was a man who had made a real sacrifice for for the sake of his duty, and who had not spoken of it, and that this deserved respect. She held his gaze. When you came and spoke to me as though I were a problem to be resolved, I was very disappointed. I had expected better. He looked at her. So I did not call you your grace, she said, because I was not yet prepared to give you the grace. I was waiting to see if you would earn it. A pause. And, he said. And you did, she said. You have. She picked up her journal again, then set it down again, which was not like her. Edmund. Yes. She looked at him. The grey eyes, the real thing, the whole attention. I should like you to know that I am glad you stayed, that I think you are better than you were when you arrived, and that I believe you think the same of yourself, and that I am... She stopped. I am not accustomed to expressing... I know, he said. But I want you to know it, regardless. He reached across the table and took her hand, which was not something they made ceremony of. Eleanor looked at their joined hands and went back to the rose hip. In the kitchen garden, Thomas laughed at something, high and clear, and Peel's voice rose in response. Your Grace, Edmund said very mildly. Cecily looked at him over the legal journal, with the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. No, she said. He smiled. She was smiling too, the real one, without asking permission, and what passed between them was not dramatic. It was simply warm and known and chosen, the expression of two people who had been proved wrong about each other and were grateful for it every day of their lives. Edmund, she said. Cecily. In the kitchen garden, Thomas was telling Peel something important. Eleanor had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, small and entirely herself, the rose hip still loosely in her hand. The walled garden held its last October roses, with the unhurried certainty of something that has learned to come back every year, and the apple trees against the south wall spread their branches in the geometry of a man's patient first year and all the years since. Edmund Cavendish, Duke of Aldermere, drank his morning coffee in the garden he had once walked past, in the house he had come back to, with the woman who had read to the back of a defective lease and known exactly what to do with what she found there. He had been wrong about her. He was grateful for that every morning. This was one of them.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, or at least leave a comment. Thanks for watching.